The dust rose in small, choking clouds with each step Clara took along the wagon trail. Her arms ached from carrying Samuel, 5 years old but weighing no more than a child of 3. His head lolled against her shoulder, eyes glazed with the peculiar shine that comes when hunger has gone on too long. The October sun beat down mercilessly on the Kansas prairie, turning the grass to brittle gold that crackled beneath her worn boots. She'd walked 12 miles since dawn, stopping at every homestead she could find. The responses had become a familiar refrain, doors closing before she could finish speaking, women clutching their aprons and shaking their heads, men spitting tobacco juice and muttering about bad luck following widows. At the Garrison place, Mrs. Garrison had peered at her through the crack in the door and hissed, "We got troubles enough without taking on yours. Get on." Clara's throat was raw from the dust and from holding back tears. She couldn't cry, not when Samuel needed every drop of moisture her body could spare. The last of their water had run out yesterday, and the jerky she'd been rationing was down to a piece the size of her thumb, tucked deep in her pocket for when the boy woke again. "Mama?" Samuel's voice was barely a whisper. "My belly hurts." "I know, sweet boy, I know." She shifted him to her other hip, though both sides screamed in protest. "We'll find somewhere soon, I promise." It was a promise she no longer believed she could keep. They'd been walking for 3 days now, ever since Sheriff Watson had come to evict them from the shack outside Millerton. Her husband's debts, he'd said, showing papers she couldn't read. The bank owned everything, the land, the tools, even the rickety table where she'd served their last meal. She'd grabbed what she could carry, a change of clothes for Samuel, her mother's Bible, a knife, the remaining food. Everything else stayed behind, including her pride. The sun was beginning its descent when she spotted the horse ranch. It sat low against the horizon, a collection of rough-hewn buildings surrounded by corrals where a dozen horses milled about. Smoke drifted from a chimney, and her empty stomach clenched at the thought of food cooking inside. This was smaller than the other places she'd tried. Just a working ranch. Not a proper homestead with a woman to plead with, but desperation had stripped away her preferences. As she approached the main gate, a man emerged from the barn. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with shoulders broadened by years of labor. His face was obscured by the shadow of his hat brim, but she could see the dark stubble along his jaw, the way his shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal forearms marked by sun and scars. He moved with the economy of someone who wasted nothing, not words, not motion, not time. Clara stopped at the gate, swaying slightly. Samuel whimpered in her arms. "Please," she began, her voice cracking. "Please, sir, my boy, he's starving. I've tried everywhere else. I'm not asking for charity." The man said nothing, just stood there with a bridle in one hand, watching. His stillness unnerved her more than hostility would have, at least with hostility. She knew where she stood. "I can work," she rushed on. "I can cook, clean, mend. I know horses, too. My father raised them before the war. I'm not asking for wages, just—" She swallowed hard, forcing out words that tasted like ash. "I'll be your servant, a bondservant, if that's what it takes. 7 years, like in the Bible, longer if you want. Just please, give my boy food and shelter." The man set down the bridle with deliberate care. He walked closer, his boots raising small puffs of dust. Now she could see his face properly, weathered as old leather, with deep lines around eyes the color of winter sky. Those eyes moved from her to Samuel, taking in the boy's hollow cheeks and listless form. "What's wrong with him?" His voice was low, rough as gravel. "Hungry," Clara said simply. "We haven't eaten proper in 4 days. Just bits of jerky and whatever water we could find." She felt Samuel's forehead. "Think he might have fever, too?" The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked back at the house, then at the setting sun, then at her again. The silence stretched until Clara thought she might scream from it. "I'll work hard," she whispered. Harder than any man. I won't cause trouble. I won't steal. I'll sleep in the barn if you want. Just please. He's all I have left." Something shifted in the man's expression, so subtle she might have imagined it. He turned and walked back toward the house, leaving the gate open behind him. Clara stood frozen, unsure if this was invitation or dismissal. He paused at the porch steps, glancing back. "You coming or not?" Clara's legs nearly buckled with relief. She hurried through the gate, Samuel a dead weight in her arms. The house was simple but sturdy, logs chinked with mud, a stone chimney, glass windows that spoke of modest prosperity. Inside, it was spare as a monk's cell. A table, 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the hearth, shelves lined with a few dishes and preserved goods. Everything clean. Everything in its place. A bachelor's home, or a widower's. "Set him there." The man nodded toward a buffalo hide spread before the fireplace. Clara laid Samuel down gently, her hands shaking. The boy curled immediately toward the warmth, though the fire was banked low. She knelt beside him, pushing sweat-dampened hair from his forehead. Behind her, she heard the man moving about, the scrape of a pot, the splash of water, the chunk of wood being added to the fire. The domestic sounds seemed foreign after days of wind and her own labored breathing. She wanted to help, to prove her worth immediately, but her body wouldn't cooperate. The room swayed, and she gripped the floor to steady herself. A bowl appeared in her peripheral vision. She looked up to find the man crouched beside her, holding out a bowl of water with a clean cloth. "For the boy," he said. Clara took it with trembling hands, dabbing Samuel's face and lips. The child stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Drink, baby," she whispered, supporting his head. "Just a little." The man had returned to the stove. She heard the sounds of cooking, something sizzling, the ring of a spoon against iron. The smell hit her like a physical blow, meat and onions, actual food. Her stomach cramped violently, and she pressed a hand against it, willing herself not to shame herself by fainting. "There's more water in the pitcher," the man said without turning around. "Drink some yourself. Won't do the boy any good if you collapse." Clara hesitated. She'd had employers before, back when things were merely difficult instead of desperate. They didn't usually concern themselves with whether the help drank water. "That's an order," he added, still focused on the stove. She drank then, forcing herself to take small sips when her body screamed for her to gulp. The water was cool and clean, pulled from a deep well. It tasted like salvation. By the time the man brought 2 plates to the table, Samuel had revived enough to sit up, though Clara had to support him. The man set down the plates, one with a full portion of fried salt pork and beans, the other with just a small amount. "Boy gets the small plate," he said. His stomach shrunk. "Too much too fast will make him sick." He pushed the fuller plate toward Clara. "You eat the rest." That's too much. You should eat so you can take care of him." His tone brooked no argument. "That's what mothers do." Clara's vision blurred. She blinked hard and focused on cutting the meat into tiny pieces for Samuel, coaxing him to chew slowly. The man sat in the rocking chair, carving something with a folding knife. He didn't watch them eat, offering them the dignity of privacy in their hunger. Samuel managed half his portion before his eyes began to droop. Clara forced herself to finish her plate, though her shrunken stomach protested. When she looked up, the man was adding blankets to a pallet near the fire. "He can sleep there tonight," he said. "There's a cot in the back room for you." Thank you." The words seemed pathetically inadequate. "I meant what I said, about working. I'll earn this." The man straightened, studying her with those winter eyes. "What's your name?" "Clara Mitchell. This is Samuel." "Ethan Reed." He moved toward the door, picking up his hat. "I got stock to tend. Rest tonight. Work starts tomorrow." He was halfway out when Clara found her voice. "Mr. Reed, why didn't you turn us away? Everyone else did." He paused, hand on the doorframe. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, without looking back, Man would have to be less than human to turn away a starving child. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Clara sat in the gathering darkness, Samuel's head in her lap, and for the first time in weeks, allowed herself to believe they might survive. Outside, she could hear Ethan moving among the horses, the low murmur of his voice as he spoke to them. There was gentleness in that voice, carefully hidden but unmistakable. She thought of his hands, scarred and calloused but careful as they'd set down the water bowl. Thought of how he'd made a small plate for Samuel without her asking, understanding instinctively what the boy needed. She'd offered to be his servant, to trade her freedom for her son's life. But something in this quiet house, in the man's careful distance and unexpected kindness, suggested she might have found something else entirely. What that might be, she couldn't yet name. For now, it was enough that Samuel would sleep with a full belly, that tomorrow would come, that somewhere in this vast, unforgiving land, mercy still existed. Clara kissed her son's forehead and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Then she lay down beside him on the pallet, her hand on his chest to feel his breathing, and let exhaustion claim her. In the barn, Ethan Reed worked by lantern light, his thoughts his own, while the prairie wind sang its lonesome song around the corners of the house where a desperate woman and her child had found shelter at last. Clara woke to unfamiliar sounds, the creak of floorboards overhead, the distant neigh of horses, the pop of wood in a freshly stoked fire. For a moment, panic seized her chest. Where was Samuel? Then she felt the warm weight of him pressed against her side, his breathing deep and even. They were safe. They were inside. Gray dawn light filtered through the windows. The house was empty, but evidence of Ethan Reed's morning routine was everywhere. Coffee warming on the stove, fresh wood stacked by the hearth, a bucket of clean water by the door. On the table sat 2 plates covered with a clean cloth. Clara lifted the edge, biscuits and a small portion of preserved peaches. Samuel stirred as she moved. His eyes, when they opened, were clearer than they'd been in days. "Mama, where are we?" "Somewhere safe, sweet boy." She helped him sit up, checking his forehead. The fever had broken in the night. "Are you hungry?" He nodded eagerly, and her heart lifted. A child who wanted food was a child who would live. They ate in silence, Clara's ears straining for any sound of their host. Through the window, she could see him in the far corral, working with a young stallion. The horse was fighting the lead rope, rearing and striking, but Ethan moved with unhurried patience, never raising his voice or hand. After breakfast, Clara explored the house properly, Samuel trailing behind her with renewed energy. The main room they knew. The kitchen area was sparse but clean. A few pots, basic supplies, everything scrubbed spotless. A narrow hallway led to 2 doors. The first opened to a small bedroom with a narrow cot, a washstand, and hooks for clothes. The second door was closed. "That's Mr. Reed's room," Clara told Samuel quietly. "We don't go in there." "Yes, Mama." She found cleaning supplies in a cupboard and set to work immediately. The house was already neat, but she could make it shine. Samuel helped as much as a 5-year-old could, carrying rags and fetching water. By the time Ethan returned at midday, she'd scrubbed every surface, beaten the dust from the buffalo hide, and had beans soaking for supper. He stood in the doorway, taking in the changes. His expression gave away nothing. "I've started the washing too," Clara said, suddenly nervous. "Your shirts were in the basket by the door. I hope that's fine." He hung his hat on the peg and moved to the water bucket to wash. "Boy looks better. The fever broke. He ate well this morning." Ethan nodded, drying his hands. He studied Samuel, who was trying to hide behind Clara's skirts while sneaking glances at this strange, silent man. "You know horses, boy?" Samuel peeked out further. "A little, sir. Mama showed me." "Come on, then." He headed back outside without checking if they followed. Clara took Samuel's hand, and they trailed after him to the barn. Inside, the smell of hay and horses wrapped around them like a familiar blanket. Ethan led them to a stall where a mare stood with a leggy foal. "Born 3 days ago." He said, "Mare's name is Buttercup. Haven't named the foal yet." Samuel's eyes went wide. The foal was all knobby knees and curious eyes, its coat a soft brown with a white star on its forehead. "Can I pet him?" And yes, if you're gentle." Ethan showed Samuel how to approach slowly, where to touch, how to read the foal's body language. His hands guided the boy's smaller ones with surprising patience. Clara watched, something tight in her chest loosening. She'd seen men who were kind to children in public but cruel in private. But this felt genuine, a man who simply knew how to be careful with small, fragile things. "What should we name her?" Ethan asked Samuel. The boy's face scrunched in concentration. "Star? 'Cause of her face." "Star it is." They spent an hour in the barn, Ethan teaching Samuel about the different horses, their temperaments, their needs. The boy soaked it up like drought-dry soil taking rain. When they finally returned to the house, Samuel was chattering about horses while Ethan listened with grave attention. Clara served the midday meal, simple fare of cornbread and the beans she'd managed to season with what she could find. Ethan ate without comment, but he cleaned his plate. After, he pushed back from the table. "I'll be working the north pasture this afternoon. There's mending in the basket by the chair if you're inclined." He left before she could respond. Clara found the basket, shirts with torn seams, socks with holes, all washed but waiting for repair. She settled into the rocking chair with her needle, while Samuel played quietly with some wooden blocks he'd discovered in a box by the hearth. The afternoon passed peacefully. Through the window, she could sometimes see Ethan in the distance, a lone figure against the vast sky. There was something deeply solitary about him, as if loneliness had seeped into his bones. The house reflected it, functional but without warmth, maintained but not truly lived in. When shadows grew long, he returned. Clara had supper waiting, salt pork and beans again, but she'd made biscuits and found some wild onions to add flavor. Ethan washed up and sat at his place. They ate in silence until Samuel, emboldened by the morning's success, piped up, "Mr. Reed, how come you live all alone?" "Samuel?" Clara's face flushed. "That's not polite to ask." Ethan's fork paused halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully. "Boy's curious. Natural enough." He looked at Samuel directly. "Been alone a long time. Gotten used to it." "Don't you get lonely?" Clara wanted to sink through the floor, but Ethan considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. That's why I keep horses. They're good company." "Better than people?" A ghost of what might have been a smile touched Ethan's lips. "Sometimes." After supper, Clara insisted on cleaning up alone. "You've been working all day. Please, sit." He didn't argue, settling into the rocking chair with his carving knife and a piece of wood. Samuel crept closer, fascinated by the movement of the blade. "What are you making?" "Haven't decided yet. Wood usually tells me what it wants to be." Clara worked quietly, listening to Ethan's low voice as he answered Samuel's endless questions. When had he started carving? How did he learn about horses? Had he ever seen a real Indian? The man who'd barely spoken to her all day seemed to have endless patience for a curious child. When Samuel finally yawned, Clara scooped him up. "Time for bed. Sweet boy. Can I see Star tomorrow?" "If Mr. Reed says it's all right." Ethan nodded. "Foal needs to get used to people anyway." Clara carried Samuel to their pallet, helping him into his nightshirt and listening to his prayers. When she returned to the main room, Ethan was banking the fire for the night. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being kind to him. Not all men would bother." He straightened, not quite meeting her eyes. "Boy's been through enough hard. Doesn't need more." "Still, I'm grateful." The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. Clara twisted her hands in her apron. "I meant what I said yesterday, about working for our keep. I know you didn't agree to the terms I offered, but I want to earn our place here. You worked all day. Food's been better than what I usually manage. House looks different too. Cleaner. That's not enough. Not for what you're giving us." Ethan turned then, fixing her with that steady gaze. What I'm giving you is a roof and food. What you're giving back is cooking and cleaning. Seems fair enough. But I know what you offered. His voice was quiet but firm. Desperation makes people say things. Do things. That's not what I want from you. Clara's eyes burned. Then what do you want? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, do your work. Take care of your boy. That's all. He moved toward the hallway, then paused. The cot in the back room. It's yours if you want it. Door locks from the inside. The implication in those words, that she might need to lock a door against him, that he understood her fears and wanted to ease them, broke something loose in her chest. Mr. Reed. Ethan. Just Ethan. He didn't turn around. Get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch. She heard his door close, then the sound of boots being pulled off. Clara stood alone in the main room, trying to reconcile this taciturn, careful man with everything she'd learned about men since her husband died. The ones who'd leered at her in town. Mason, with his cruel promises and grasping hands. The good folk who'd turned her away, letting a child starve rather than risk their respectability. And now Ethan Reed, who asked for nothing but honest work, who taught her son about horses, who made sure she knew she could lock her door. Clara checked on Samuel one more time, then gathered her courage and went to the small back room. The cot was narrow but clean, with a wool blanket folded at the foot. The door did indeed have a lock, a simple slide bolt, but solid. She closed the door but didn't lock it. Somehow, she didn't think she needed to. That night, lying in an actual bed for the first time in weeks, Clara allowed herself to think beyond mere survival. What would tomorrow bring? Next week? She'd offered to bind herself in servitude. The last desperate act of a mother with nothing left to lose. Instead, she'd found something she hadn't dared hope for. Simple human decency. But nothing came free in this hard land. Ethan might not want what she'd offered, but he wanted something. Men always did. For now, he seemed content with cooking and cleaning. But Clara had learned not to trust the present to predict the future. She would work. She would watch. She would keep Samuel safe. And maybe, just maybe, in this quiet house with its silent owner and its view of endless sky, they could rest long enough to remember what it felt like to be human again. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the prairie. In the barn, horses shifted and dozed. And in 3 separate rooms of a simple ranch house, 3 souls slept, each nursing their own wounds, each wondering what strange providence had brought them together, each hoping that morning would prove this wasn't just another dream destined to turn to dust. The storm came 3 weeks later, rolling across the prairie like God's own fury. Clara had seen it building all day. The heavy air, the restless horses, the way Ethan kept glancing at the darkening western sky. By late afternoon, he was herding the stock into the barn, his movements quick and purposeful. Going to be a bad one, he said, securing the last stall. You and the boy stay in the house tonight. Clara helped him shutter the windows, feeling the first fat raindrops hit her face. Samuel danced around their feet, excited by the break in routine. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the wind picked up, whipping her skirts against her legs. They barely made it inside before the sky opened. Rain hammered the roof like fists, and lightning turned the world white in stuttering flashes. Samuel pressed close to Clara, his earlier excitement gone. It's just a storm. Sweet boy, she soothed, though her own heart raced. Storms on the prairie were no small thing. Ethan lit the lamps and stoked the fire higher. He moved with calm efficiency, checking the door, making sure the water buckets were full. Clara busied herself with supper, grateful for the distraction. They'd settled into a routine these past weeks. She cooked and kept house. He worked the ranch, and slowly, carefully, they'd learned to exist in the same space without friction. The storm worsened as they ate. Wind screamed around the corners of the house, and something crashed outside. A loose board or bucket caught in the gale. Samuel flinched at each thunderclap, his food forgotten. How about a story? Ethan suggested quietly. Samuel looked up, surprised. Ethan rarely initiated conversation, though he always responded when spoken to. What kind of story? Well, let's see. Ethan pushed his empty plate aside. Ever hear about the time a tornado picked up a whole herd of longhorns and set them down 3 counties over? It was nonsense, of course, but Ethan spun it with a straight face, adding just enough detail to make it seem plausible. Samuel hung on every word. Storm temporarily forgotten. Clara watched from the corner of her eye as she cleaned up, marveling at this hidden facet of her taciturn employer. The wind suddenly howled louder, and with a splintering crack, something hit the side of the house. The whole structure shuddered. Samuel yelped and dove for Clara, burying his face in her skirts. Just a branch, Ethan said, but his eyes were concerned. He went to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. Trees are taking a beating out there. Another crash, this time from the direction of the lean-to where Clara had been sleeping these past weeks. She'd moved out there for propriety's sake once the weather warmed, leaving the small back room for storage. Through the wall, they could hear wood splitting and falling. That's the lean-to going, Ethan said grimly. Good thing you weren't in it. Clara's few possessions were out there. Her spare dress, her mother's Bible. The little Samuel had all gone now, claimed by the storm. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. They were alive. That was what mattered. The storm raged for hours. They huddled near the fire, Ethan telling stories when the noise got too frightening for Samuel. Eventually, the boy dozed off in Clara's lap, exhausted by fear in the late hour. Should move him to the back room, Ethan said. You too. If the roof goes, that's the most sheltered spot. Clara nodded, gathering Samuel carefully. He was getting heavier. 3 weeks of regular meals had begun to fill out his hollow cheeks. She laid him on the cot and returned to the main room, too anxious to sleep. Ethan sat by the fire, feeding it steadily. The wood supply inside wouldn't last if the storm continued much longer. I'm sorry about your things, he said without preamble. In the lean-to. They're just things. Clara settled into the rocking chair, pulling her shawl tighter. We're alive and dry. That's blessing enough. Lightning illuminated his profile. Sharp nose, strong jaw. The perpetual stubble he never quite managed to eliminate. Still, a woman needs her belongings. I've learned to need very little. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the storm's fury. The house creaked and groaned but held firm, well built, like everything else Ethan touched. Can I ask you something? Clara ventured. He nodded, eyes on the fire. Why did you really take us in? You could have given us food and sent us on. Most would have. Ethan was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible over the storm. Had a sister once, younger than me, Sarah. He shifted, uncomfortable with the telling. Married a man who took her west, promising gold and fortune. Found neither. When the money ran out, he ran too. Left her with 2 little ones and winter coming on. Clara's hand stilled in her lap. She was too proud to come home. Thought she could make it on her own, doing wash, taking in sewing. His jaw tightened. Neighbor found them when the spring thaw came, all 3 frozen in their beds. Oh, Ethan. The name slipped out unbidden. Got the letter 2 years after they died. Mail was slow getting to where I was. He finally looked at her. When I saw you at my gate, holding that boy, looking like you'd walked till you dropped. Couldn't let it happen again. Clara's eyes burned. I'm so sorry. Not your fault. Not anybody's fault except mine for not checking on her sooner, and his for being a worthless coward. The last was said with quiet venom. You couldn't have known. Could have, should have, didn't. He stood abruptly. Storm's getting worse. I better check the barn. You can't go out in this. Horses need tending. Won't be long. Before she could protest further, he'd thrown on his oilcloth coat and plunged into the tempest. Clara ran to the window, but she could see nothing through the rain and darkness. Minutes crawled by. The storm seemed to intensify, If such a thing were possible. Wind screamed like a living thing, and hail began to mix with the rain, drumming against the roof. When the door finally burst open again, Ethan was soaked through, water streaming from his hat and coat. He was breathing hard. Barnes holding, but barely. Had to turn the horses loose. Better they run than get crushed if the roof goes. He shed the wet coat, shivering. You're frozen. Clara grabbed a blanket from the chair. Sit by the fire. I'll make coffee. I'm fine. Sit. Her tone brooked no argument, and, surprisingly, he obeyed. She busied herself with the coffee, sneaking glances at him. He'd drawn the blanket around his shoulders and extended his hands toward the flames, in the firelight, with his guard down. He looked younger, vulnerable, even. Here. She pressed a hot mug into his hands. That was foolish, going out there. Couldn't let them die trapped. He took a sip, closing his eyes as warmth spread through him. Lost too much already. Clara understood he wasn't talking about horses anymore. She returned to the rocking chair, and they sat quietly while the storm battered the world outside. The coffee ran out, the woodpile dwindled. Still the rain came. I never thanked you properly, Clara said into the comfortable silence. For saving us. No thanks needed. You've more than earned your keep. That's not what I mean. She searched for words. You gave us dignity along with shelter. You didn't expect anything. Didn't make me beg or grovel or... She stopped, unable to voice the other things men had wanted. You were ready to sell yourself into servitude for your boy. His voice was gruff. Any mother worth the name would do the same. Doesn't mean anyone should take advantage of it. Most would have. Then most are bastards. The profanity slipped out, and he looked almost surprised. Pardon my language. Clara almost smiled. I've heard worse, said worse. When Samuel couldn't hear, that startled a sound from him that might have been a chuckle. Expect you have. The storm was finally beginning to slacken, the wind's howl diminishing to a moan. They'd made it through. Dawn couldn't be far off, though the clouds still blocked any hint of light. I should check on Samuel, Clara said, rising. Clara. Her name on his lips stopped her. He so rarely used it. About the lean-to, you'll need to stay in the house now. Take the back room permanent-like. I'll string a curtain for privacy. People will talk. People already talk. Let them. He met her eyes steadily. Your boy needs a solid roof over his head. That's what matters. She nodded, throat tight. Thank you. And we'll go to town next week. You need clothes, supplies. Can't have you making do with nothing. I can't. You've been mending my clothes for 3 weeks, making meals out of nothing, keeping this place cleaner than it's been in years. His voice was firm. You've earned it. Don't argue. Clara blinked back tears. After so long scraping and begging, simple fairness felt like an impossible gift. A soft cry from the back room sent her hurrying to Samuel. He was sitting up, disoriented and frightened by the strange sounds. Mama, is the storm eating the house? No, sweet boy. The storm's almost over. We're safe. She gathered him close, feeling his small heart racing against her chest. Through the doorway, she could see Ethan adding the last of the wood to the fire, his movements careful and deliberate. He'd risked his life for horses, opened his home to strangers, and asked for nothing but honest work in return. Is Mr. Ethan safe too? Samuel whispered. Yes, baby. We're all safe. As if hearing his name. Ethan looked up, meeting her eyes across the dim room. Something passed between them, not attraction, not yet, but understanding, recognition of one damaged soul by another, a promise, perhaps, that in this house they could heal without fear of further wounds. The storm moved on, leaving destruction in its wake. Come morning, they'd count the damage, mourn what was lost, begin repairs. But for now, in the pre-dawn darkness, they were simply 3 people who'd weathered nature's fury together. 3 people learning that sometimes grace came disguised as a taciturn rancher, that salvation could be found in a simple meal shared, that dignity was worth more than gold. Clara held her son and watched the fire die to embers, while somewhere in the darkness, Ethan Reed kept his quiet vigil, guardian of broken things that might yet be made whole. The morning after the storm dawned clear and merciless, revealing the prairie's wounds. Clara stood in the doorway, Samuel's hand in hers, surveying the damage. The lean-to was gone, reduced to splinters scattered across the yard. A massive cottonwood had fallen, missing the barn by mere feet. Debris littered the ground, branches, boards, someone's washing blown in from God knows where. Ethan was already working, clearing the path to the barn. He moved steadily, methodically, as if the destruction were just another chore to manage. The horses had returned at dawn, muddy but unharmed, drawn back by habit and the promise of oats. "Can I help Mr. Ethan?" Samuel called out. Ethan straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "You can gather the small sticks, pile them by the house. We'll use them for kindling." The boy scampered off, eager to be useful. Clara rolled up her sleeves and joined Ethan at the fallen tree. "Too big to move whole," he said. "I'll need to cut it up. Tell me what to do." He looked at her, really looked, taking in her determined expression and work-ready stance. "You sure? It's hard labor. I've done hard labor before." A ghost of approval crossed his features. "All right then, I'll saw. You help stack, watch for nails and sharp edges." They worked through the morning, the only sounds the rasp of the saw and Samuel's chatter as he made his stick piles. The sun climbed higher, baking the moisture from the ground and raising steam like ghosts. Clara's dress was soon soaked with sweat, her hands blistering despite the rags she'd wrapped around them. She didn't complain. Around midday, Ethan called a halt. They sat in the shade of the house, drinking water and eating cold biscuits left from breakfast. Samuel had constructed an elaborate fort from his gathered sticks and was populating it with pebble soldiers. "Storm took the smokehouse too," Ethan observed, nodding toward a pile of rubble. "Lost most of the preserved meat." Clara's stomach sank. She knew how precious those stores were, how much work went into filling them. "I'm sorry, not your doing." He took another drink. "Adam's apple working. Just means more hunting this fall. Maybe trade with the neighbors for what we can't shoot." "We?" He glanced at her, then away. "You planning on leaving?" "No, I didn't assume." "Winter's coming. Be foolish to travel with a child. Foolish for me to lose a good cook and housekeeper." His tone was practical, but she heard something else underneath. "Unless you want to go." "No." The word came quick and firm. "We don't want to go." They returned to work. As the afternoon wore on, Clara became aware they weren't alone. A rider appeared on the horizon, then another, neighbors, come to check the damage and offer help. Ethan received them with brief nods and fewer words, introducing Clara simply as Mrs. Mitchell, my housekeeper. The men exchanged glances but said nothing directly. Their wives would have plenty to say. Clara knew, a widow living with an unmarried man. Even with a child present, even with separate rooms, it wasn't done. But these were practical people, and Winter didn't care about propriety. By evening, the worst of the debris was cleared. One of the neighbors, Jim Harrison, had brought word from town. "Storm hit Millerton hard, took the church steeple clean off." And that's not the worst of it. He accepted the cup of coffee Clara offered, eyeing her with curiosity. "Mason's place got flattened, lost everything, house, barn, the lot." Clara's hands stilled. Mason. The name sent ice through her veins. "Anyone hurt?" Ethan asked. "Mason's fine. More's the pity. Mean drunk on his best day. And this ain't likely to improve his temperament." Harrison's eyes flicked to Clara again. "He's been staying in town, talking wild. Says the storm was God's judgment. But not on him. Claims it's punishment for the town harboring. Well," he cleared his throat. "He's always been a fool." "What's he saying?" Ethan's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Harrison looked uncomfortable. "You know, Mason, he's got debts all over 3 counties. But somehow, it's always someone else's fault. Now he's fixated on..." on Tom Mitchell's widow. Says she owes him. Says her husband borrowed heavy before he died. Clara sank onto the porch step, legs suddenly weak. She'd known this day would come. Mason had been circling like a vulture even before Tom died. And after... How much? Ethan asked. He claims $300. Clara made a sound, half laugh, half sob. $300. It might as well be 3,000. 3 million. That's a lie, she said. Tom borrowed 50. I saw the paper. Mason's been adding interest and inventing fees ever since. Don't doubt it. Harrison agreed. But Mason's got friends in low places. And with his place gone, he's desperate. Desperate men do stupid things. After Harrison left, Clara busied herself with supper, hands shaking. Samuel sensed her distress and stuck close, his usual chatter subdued. Ethan disappeared into his room, emerging with something she'd never seen before, a gun belt, well-oiled and deadly looking. He strapped it on without comment, checking the loads in the Colt. Clara watched, her heart sinking. Violence followed her like a shadow, even here, in this quiet refuge. It had found her again. He won't come here, she said, hating how small her voice sounded. Mason's a coward. He only threatens women and children. Cowards are dangerous when cornered. Ethan's hands were steady on the weapon. And you're under my roof now. That means something. I should leave. I've brought trouble to your door. You've brought nothing but honest work and decent company. His eyes met hers, winter blue and implacable. Mason wants to make trouble. He'll find it, but not from you. They ate supper in tense silence. Clara barely tasted the food, her mind spinning with possibilities, each worse than the last. She knew what Mason wanted, had always known. The money was just an excuse, a lever to force her into arrangements, the kind desperate women made when they had no other choice. After Samuel was in bed, Clara found Ethan on the porch, keeping watch. The gun was within easy reach, but his hands were occupied with whittling, the familiar action seeming to calm him. I need to tell you, she began, then stopped. How did you explain the slow slide into nightmare? The husband who'd been charming until the ring was on her finger? The drinking, the gambling, the debts that mounted while promises crumbled. Tom wasn't a bad man, she said finally. Just weak. He wanted so much, land, cattle, respect. When the drought killed our crops, he got desperate, started borrowing, started drinking more. She wrapped her arms around herself. Mason saw an opportunity, loaned money at rates no honest man would charge. Tom kept thinking the next hand of cards would win it all back. Ethan listened without interrupting, his knife moving steadily over the wood. When Tom died, fever took him quick. Mason came calling before he was even cold. Said the debt passed to me. Said there were ways I could work it off. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I ran that night, took Samuel and what little we had and ran. We've been running ever since. You don't have to run anymore. You don't understand. Mason has papers, legal documents, a judge who drinks with him. I understand plenty. Ethan set down his carving, turning to face her fully. I understand a man who preys on the desperate, who uses the law like a weapon, who thinks a woman alone is easy pickings. His jaw set. He's about to learn different. I can't ask you to fight my battles. You're not asking. I'm choosing. He stood, looming solid and sure in the lamplight. Get some rest. Tomorrow we go to town like planned. You need supplies, and Mason needs to see you're not alone anymore. Clara wanted to protest, but the steel in his voice stopped her. This wasn't the quiet rancher who barely spoke at meals. This was someone harder, someone who'd faced down trouble before and survived it. She went inside, pausing at the door. Ethan, why are you doing this? Really? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Because I've been the man who stayed silent when I should have spoken, who walked away when I should have stood firm. Not anymore. Clara lay awake long into the night, listening to his footsteps on the porch, the creak of the rocking chair as he kept his vigil. Outside, coyotes called across the empty land, and somewhere in the darkness, trouble was brewing. But inside this house, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Clara felt something that might have been hope. Mason could come. Let him try to collect his false debt, make his ugly threats. He'd find more than a desperate widow this time. He'd find Ethan Reed, who wore a gun like he knew how to use it, who spoke of protection like a promise, who'd chosen to stand between her and harm for reasons she didn't fully understand but was beginning to trust. The night wore on. Samuel slept peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon, this one made of greed and malice rather than wind and rain. And Clara finally slept too, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, she wouldn't face it alone. The trip to town came 2 days later. Ethan had wanted to go immediately, but Clara convinced him to wait. She needed time to mend her one remaining dress, to make Samuel presentable, to gather her courage. The morning dawned bright and clear, with a hint of autumn crispness in the air. Ethan brought the wagon around, helped Clara and Samuel up, then took his place on the seat. The gun belt was hidden beneath his coat, but Clara knew it was there. The rifle lay within easy reach under the seat. They looked like any ranch family heading to town for supplies, but tension hummed between them like a taut wire. Samuel chattered excitedly as they rolled along the rutted track. He'd only been to town twice in his young life, and the prospect of seeing the general store, the horses, the bustle of people filled him with joy. Clara tried to match his enthusiasm, but her stomach churned with each mile that passed. "Remember what we talked about?" Ethan said quietly as the first buildings came into view. "You stay close. Don't wander off alone. If there's trouble, there won't be trouble." Clara interrupted, as much to convince herself as him. "Mason's all talk." Ethan's grunt suggested he disagreed, but he said no more. Millerton looked worse for wear after the storm. Broken windows were boarded over, and men worked on rooftops, replacing shingles torn away by the wind. The church steeple lay in pieces in the churchyard, awaiting repair, but commerce continued. Horses tied to hitching posts, women with baskets doing their shopping, the ring of the blacksmith's hammer. They stopped first at Henderson's general store. Mr. Henderson, a thin man with kind eyes, greeted them warmly. "Ethan Reed, don't see you in town much." "And who's this?" His gaze landed on Clara with curiosity but no judgment. "Mrs. Mitchell, my housekeeper. Her boy, Samuel." Ethan's tone discouraged further questions. "She needs supplies. Put it on my account." Henderson's eyebrows rose, but he nodded. "Of course. What can I help you with, ma'am?" Clara had made a careful list, mindful of not taking advantage. Basic dress goods, thread, needles, shoes for Samuel. His toes were pushing through his current pair. A few preserving jars for the coming harvest, modest purchases. But after months of having nothing, they felt like treasures. Samuel pressed his nose against the glass case holding penny candy, eyes wide. Henderson chuckled. "Go ahead, boy. Pick one. My treat for new customers." While Samuel agonized over his choice, Clara became aware of whispers. 2 women near the fabric counter were eyeing her, heads bent together. She caught fragments. Living at the Reed place, widow, not proper. She kept her chin up, focusing on her selections. Let them talk. They hadn't walked in her shoes, hadn't faced her choices. The bell over the door jangled. The whispers stopped. Clara turned to see Mason filling the doorway, his bulk blocking the light. His clothes were rumpled, his face unshaven, but his eyes were sharp and mean as they found her. Well, the runaway widow." His voice slurred slightly. "Drinking already, though it wasn't yet noon." "Thought you could hide from me, Clara." Ethan materialized at her elbow, solid and calm. "Mitchell, you're drunk. Move along." Mason's bloodshot eyes shifted to Ethan, taking in the protective stance, the hand resting casually near his coat. "Reed, should have known you'd be sniffing around. Tom always said you had an eye for his wife." "Tom said a lot of things, most of them lies." Ethan's voice was level, but Clara saw the muscle jump in his jaw. "The ladies shopping, Leave her be. The lady owes me money." Mason pulled a folded paper from his pocket, waving it like a flag. $300. It's all legal. Read. Judge Carter witnessed it himself." "That's a lie," Clara said, finding her voice. "Tom borrowed 50. I was there." Mason's smile was ugly. "Interest, sweetheart. Penalties, it adds up. But I'm a reasonable man." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "We could work out an arrangement. Reduce the debt significant, like, if you're accommodating." Ethan moved so fast Clara barely saw it. One moment Mason was leering. The next he was slammed against the door frame, Ethan's forearm across his throat. "You listen careful," Ethan said, voice low and dangerous. "Mrs. Mitchell works for me. Honest work. You speak to her respectful, or you don't speak to her at all. And any debt her husband had died with him, that's the law in this state, whatever paper you're waving." "You threatening me? Read?" Mason wheezed. "Stating facts." Ethan released him with a shove. "Now get out before I decide you need a lesson in manners." Mason stumbled out, but not before shooting Clara a look of pure venom. "This isn't over. That money's mine by rights. One way or another. I'll collect." The store was silent after he left. Henderson cleared his throat nervously. The women by the fabric counter had fled. Samuel stood frozen by the candy case, eyes wide with fear. "I apologize for the disturbance," Ethan said to Henderson. "We'll finish our business and go. No need to apologize. Mason's been a plague on this town for years." Henderson's voice was sympathetic. "You take your time, ma'am. And here," he added several lengths of good wool to Clara's pile. "Storm damaged some bolts. Can't sell them full price anyway." Clara knew it was charity, kindly meant, but she took it with gratitude. They completed their purchases quickly, Ethan carrying everything to the wagon. The street seemed full of eyes, watching, judging. "One more stop," Ethan said, helping her up. "The sheriff's office?" Sheriff Dunbar was a grizzled man in his 50s, fair but tired-looking. He listened to Ethan's account of the confrontation without interrupting. "Mason's got that paper," he said finally. "Judge Carter did witness it, though what state they were both in at the time is anyone's guess. But Ethan's right about the law. Debts don't pass to widows unless they co-signed. Did you sign anything, Mrs. Mitchell?" "Nothing. Tom never even told me about most of his borrowing until near the end." "Then legally, Mason's got no claim. Problem is, legal and what Mason does aren't always the same thing." The sheriff sighed. "I'll talk to him. Make it clear he's to leave you alone. But watch yourself. Desperate men are unpredictable men." They left town under a cloud of stares and whispers. Samuel huddled between them, clutching his penny candy but too upset to eat it. Clara kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, fighting the urge to look back, to see if Mason was following. "I'm sorry," she said as they cleared the town limits. "I've made everything worse. The whole town's talking. Let them talk." Ethan's hands were steady on the reins. "They've been gossiping about me for years anyway. Least now they have something new to chew on. But your reputation—" "My reputation?" He actually smiled, a brief twist of lips. "Clara, I'm the man who came back from the war and shut himself away with his horses, who doesn't go to church, doesn't socialize, doesn't court any of their daughters. They already think I'm half wild. Having you at the ranch just confirms it." "You were in the war?" She'd wondered about the shadows in his eyes, the way he moved like a man accustomed to danger. 4 years. Cavalry." His smile faded. "Saw things. Did things. Came home different than I left." He glanced at her. "That bother you?" "No." She thought of her own shadows, her own changes. We're all different than we were. They rode in companionable silence for a while. Samuel gradually relaxed, beginning to point out things along the road. A hawk circling. A prairie dog colony. The distant smudge of mountains. The familiar landscape seemed to calm him. "Mr. Ethan?" he piped up. "Why was that man so mean to Mama?" Ethan considered his answer. "Some people, when they hurt, they try to make others hurt too. makes them feel powerful. But it's a false power, built on fear. Were you scared of him? No, son, but I was scared for your mama. There's a difference. Samuel digested this. I didn't like him. Good instincts. Ethan ruffled the boy's hair. Trust those feelings. They'll serve you well. As the ranch came into view, Clara felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. The confrontation with Mason had been inevitable, but it was done now. Cards on the table, lines drawn. Whatever came next, at least the waiting was over. That evening, after supper, Ethan surprised her by bringing out a wooden box. What's this? Something that's been gathering dust. He opened it to reveal a Colt revolver, smaller than his own, with a worn but well-maintained grip. It was Sarah's, my sister's. She knew how to use it. Clara stared at the weapon, understanding the significance of the gift. Ethan, I can't. You can and you will. His tone brooked no argument. Mason won't stay scared forever. When he comes, and he will come, you need to be ready. I've never shot a pistol. Then we'll teach you, same as I taught you the rifle. He met her eyes. I can't always be here. You need to be able to protect yourself and Samuel. Clara took the gun with trembling hands. It was heavier than she expected, cold and solid. The weight of it was sobering, not just the physical weight, but what it represented. Ethan was right. The confrontation in town had only delayed the inevitable. Thank you, she whispered. For everything, for standing up to him. For this, for... She gestured helplessly, unable to encompass all he'd done. No thanks needed. He closed the box, businesslike again. We'll start practicing tomorrow. Best to be prepared. That night, Clara lay in her narrow bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch, horses nickering, wind in the eaves, the distant yip of coyotes. But underneath the peace was a new awareness. Storm clouds were gathering again, this time in the shape of a desperate man with a grudge. She thought of Ethan's sister, Sarah, who'd owned that gun but hadn't been able to save herself. Thought of Ethan carrying that guilt, that failure, all these years. No wonder he was determined to arm her, to ensure history didn't repeat. Tomorrow she would learn to shoot. Tomorrow she would take another step away from the frightened woman who'd appeared at his gate. Tomorrow she would begin to become someone who could stand and fight instead of always running. But tonight, she simply held her sleeping son and was grateful for the roof over their heads, the man keeping watch, and the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this place of tentative safety. Whatever storms were coming, they would weather them. They had no other choice. The shooting lessons began at dawn the next day. Ethan had set up targets behind the barn, old cans and bottles lined on a fence rail. The morning air was cool and still, perfect for practicing. Samuel watched from the porch, under strict orders to stay put. Hold it firm but not tight, Ethan instructed, positioning Clara's hands on the revolver. Like you're holding a bird, firm enough it can't fly away, gentle enough you don't crush it. His hands covered hers, large and calloused, steadying her grip. Clara tried to focus on the target, not on the warmth of him standing close behind her, the patient rumble of his voice near her ear. Breathe in, let half out, squeeze, don't jerk. The gun kicked when she fired, the shot going wild. Her ears rang despite the warning. Again, Ethan said simply. They practiced for an hour each morning. Clara's aim improved slowly, though she suspected she'd never have Ethan's easy accuracy. He could draw and fire in one smooth motion, hitting whatever he aimed at without seeming to try. But she learned to hit the targets more often than not, to reload quickly, to keep the weapon clean and ready. You're pushing yourself too hard, Ethan observed after a particularly frustrating session where she'd missed every shot. I need to be better. Clara lowered the gun, flexing her sore fingers. If Mason comes, when Mason comes, Ethan corrected. And you'll be ready, but exhausting yourself won't help. Fear makes your hands shake. Anger makes you rush. You need to find your calm center. How do you do it? Stay so steady? He was quiet for a moment, looking out over the prairie. Learn during the war, when everything's chaos. You find one true thing to hold on to, one thing that matters more than the fear. What was yours? Getting home. He took the gun from her, checking it automatically. Had a ranch to rebuild, horses to tend. Couldn't do that dead. He glanced at her. What's yours? Clara didn't hesitate. Samuel, keeping him safe. Then hold on to that. Let everything else fall away. The lessons continued, but they became about more than just shooting. Ethan taught her to move quietly, to be aware of her surroundings, to trust her instincts. He showed her how to handle the horses, not just ride, but truly work with them. If trouble comes and I'm not here, you take Samuel and ride, he instructed. Star's the fastest, but Buttercup's most reliable. She'll run all day if needed. Where would we go? The Harrison place. Jim's solid, and his wife's kind. They'll shelter you till I come. The assumption that he would come for them, stated so matter-of-factly, made her throat tight. When had this arrangement shifted from temporary shelter to something more permanent? When had she started thinking of the ranch as home? September slipped toward October, the days growing shorter. They worked to prepare for winter, cutting wood, patching the barn, preserving what they could from the garden Clara had managed to coax to life. Samuel helped eagerly, proud to be useful. He'd grown 2 inches and filled out considerably, his cheeks round and healthy. One evening, Ethan brought out his ledger to do accounts. Clara watched him frown over the figures. Bad? Not good. He rubbed his jaw. Lost more in that storm than I thought. Feed's going to be tight this winter, and I need to replace tools. I could take less, Clara began. No. His voice was firm. You earn your wages fair and square. I'll sell a horse if needed. Been thinking about it anyway. Too many mouths to feed. Which one? Maybe the bay gelding. He's trained well. Should bring a good price. Clara knew he was fond of that horse, had seen him working with it patiently for months. There must be another way. Unless you know someone who needs horses trained for quick money, selling's the answer. An idea sparked. The widow Morrison. In town, she mentioned her grandson wants to learn riding, but she's afraid of the livery stable horses. Said they're too rough. Ethan looked thoughtful. I could gentle one of the younger mares. Teach the boy, too. Might work. I could speak to her when I go to town for supplies. We go to town, he corrected. Not letting you go alone. Not with Mason still prowling. They'd had no word of Mason for weeks. But Clara knew Ethan was right. The man's silence was more ominous than his threats. She'd caught glimpses of riders in the distance, never close enough to identify, but always watching. Ethan had noticed, too. She'd seen him checking his rifle, riding the property borders more frequently. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Clara was hanging wash when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. Her hand went to her apron pocket where the small revolver rested, a weight she'd grown accustomed to, but it wasn't Mason. 3 men rode up, badges glinting in the sun. The one in front was tall and lean, with sharp features and cold eyes. He didn't dismount, looking down at Clara with an expression of distaste. Mrs. Mitchell? Yes? Deputy Ferguson. I have a warrant here for your arrest. The world tilted. On what charge? Theft, Mr. Mason claims you took money from your late husband's effects, money that rightfully belonged to him as debt payment. That's a lie. Tom died with nothing but debts. That's for a judge to decide. You'll need to come with us. Ethan emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. There a problem, Deputy? Ferguson's hand moved to his sidearm. No problem if Mrs. Mitchell comes peaceful-like. Got a warrant, all legal. Let me see it. Ferguson hesitated, then pulled out a paper. Ethan read it, jaw tightening. This is signed by Judge Carter. The man's in Mason's pocket and everyone knows it. That's a serious accusation. Read, careful, or you'll be joining her in a cell. She's not going anywhere. Ethan's voice was calm, but Clara heard steel underneath. The charge is false. Mason's trying to use the law to steal what he couldn't take by force. Not my concern. I have a warrant. I serve it. The 2 deputies with Ferguson shifted nervously. They knew Ethan's reputation. knew this could turn ugly fast. Clara's mind raced. If she went with them, she'd disappear into Mason's version of justice. But if Ethan defended her, they'd both be outlaws. "I'll come," she said quietly. "Clara, no." Ethan stepped closer to her. "You know what this is." "I know." She met his eyes, trying to convey what she couldn't say aloud. "Protect Samuel. Don't let this destroy what you've built." "It's all right." "Mama?" Samuel had appeared in the doorway, Star the barn cat in his arms. "Where are you going?" Her heart broke. "Just to town for a bit. Sweet boy, mister. Ethan will take care of you." "Smart choice," Ferguson said. "Cuff her, boys." "That's not necessary." Ethan growled. "Standard procedure for theft charges." The metal was cold on Clara's wrists. Samuel started crying, trying to run to her, but Ethan caught him, holding the struggling boy. "It's all right," Clara called, though tears blurred her vision. "Be good for Mr. Ethan. I'll be back soon." Ferguson laughed. "Don't make promises you can't keep, woman." They put her on a horse, hands bound to the saddle horn. As they rode away, she looked back to see Ethan still holding Samuel, both of them watching. Even from a distance, she could see the promise in Ethan's stance. This wasn't over. The ride to town was a nightmare. People stared as they passed, whispers following in their wake. By the time they reached the jail, a crowd had gathered. Mason stood at the front, satisfaction written across his bloated features. "There's the thief," he called out. "Thought she could hide behind Reed's guns, but the law's the law." They locked her in a small cell that smelled of vomit and despair. Ferguson left without a word, but Mason lingered, moving close to the bars. "Could have avoided this," he said softly. "All you had to do was be reasonable. Now look where pride's got you." "What do you want?" Clara kept her voice steady despite her fear. "What I've always wanted. What your husband promised when he was desperate." His eyes glittered. "But now the price has gone up. Now I want you humbled, broken, begging. I'll die first. Maybe, or maybe you'll watch that boy of yours go to an orphanage while you rot in prison." Judge Carter's very understanding about the need to protect children from criminal mothers. Ice filled her veins. "You wouldn't I?" Mason leaned closer. "But I'm still a reasonable man. One night, that's all. One night of cooperation, and this all goes away. The charges dropped, the debt forgiven. You can go back to playing house with Reed." Clara turned away, unable to bear the sight of him. Mason chuckled. "Think about it. You've got till tomorrow's hearing. After that, well, Judge Carter's not known for his mercy." His footsteps faded, leaving her alone with the reality of her situation. The cell was tiny, barely room to lie down. Through the barred window, she could see the sky darkening toward evening, somewhere out there. Samuel was crying for her. Ethan was planning. What? A rescue that would make him an outlaw? A legal defense against a corrupt system? She sank onto the filthy cot, Sarah's revolver a useless weight in her pocket. They'd been so focused on the warrant they hadn't searched her. Her hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been in weeks of practice, because now she had clarity. Mason had overplayed his hand. He'd threatened her son. Clara Mitchell had been many things, desperate, frightened, alone, but she was done being a victim. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. But tonight, in this cage, meant to break her. She found the calm center Ethan had talked about, the one true thing that mattered more than fear, protecting Samuel. And she would, whatever it cost. Night fell heavy over Millerton, and with it came the sounds Clara had learned to dread. Drunken laughter from the saloon, boots stumbling on wooden sidewalks, the occasional crash of breaking glass. She sat on the narrow cot, back straight, hands folded, Sarah's revolver a secret weight in her pocket. They'd been sloppy, assuming a woman wouldn't be armed. Their mistake. Near midnight, she heard approaching footsteps, multiple sets, trying for stealth but failing. The door to the sheriff's office creaked open, hushed voices. One of them Mason's unmistakable wheeze. "She alone?" "Just her. Sheriff's making rounds." That was Ferguson, words slurred with whiskey. "Good. Open it. Now wait a minute. Mason, We agreed to look the other way, not participate. You've participated plenty already. Open the door. Or would you prefer I tell certain people about your gambling debts? Keys jangled. Clara stood, moving to the darkest corner of the cell, hand sliding into her pocket. The main door opened, and Mason entered, Ferguson hovering nervously behind him. Come to your senses yet? Mason's bulk filled the doorway, blocking any escape. I have... Clara kept her voice level. And my answer is the same. Mason's face darkened. Ferguson, wait outside. The lady and I need to discuss terms privately. Mason, I don't think... Outside. Ferguson fled, leaving them alone. Mason approached the bars, confident in his power, secure in her helplessness. You know, your husband begged too. Near the end, when the fever had him, he promised me anything, everything, even you. His smile was cruel. Of course, he didn't have the right to promise that, but here we are anyway. Tom was many things, but he'd never... Oh, he would. He did. Want to know what else he said? How he really felt about his pretty wife? The burden she'd become? You're lying. Maybe, maybe not. Doesn't matter now. He pulled out a key. Ferguson's key. Last chance. Clara, come willing. And this stays between us. Fight, and things get unpleasant. The lock turned. The door swung open. Mason stepped inside, closing it behind him. So sure of his victory, he didn't notice how still she'd gone. That's better. Now, be a good girl and... Clara pulled the revolver in one smooth motion, just as Ethan had taught her. Find your center. Let everything else fall away. The gun was steady in her hands, aimed at Mason's considerable belly. His eyes widened. Where did you... Stay back. Her voice was calm, calmer than she'd ever been. One more step and I'll shoot. You won't. You're not a killer. Just a scared little woman playing with guns. You're right. I'm not a killer. She thumbed back the hammer, the click loud in the silence. But I'm a mother, and you threatened my son. Something in her face must have convinced him, because he stopped advancing. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night. Now you're going to call Ferguson back. Tell him you've changed your mind. The charges are dropped. I can't just... You can. You will. She adjusted her aim slightly. Or we'll see how good Doc Morrison is at digging bullets out of corrupt merchants. You shoot me, you'll hang. Maybe, but you'll still be shot. She allowed herself a cold smile. And everyone will know what you tried to do. How the big, strong man was stopped by a scared little woman. Your reputation won't survive it, even if you do. Mason's face purpled. You bit... The main door crashed open. Ethan burst in, gun drawn. Taking in the scene at a glance, behind him, Sheriff Dunbar and Jim Harrison followed, both armed. Clara, you all right? Fine. She didn't lower the gun. Mister, Mason was just agreeing to drop all charges. Like hell, Mason started. Mason! Sheriff Dunbar's voice cut through. Step away from the lady, now! She pulled a gun on me. She's the criminal here. Funny thing, the sheriff said conversationally. Jim here tells me you've been bragging at the saloon. About your plans for Mrs. Mitchell. Very detailed plans. The kind that would make any jury sympathetic to a woman defending herself. Mason looked between them. Calculating odds. 4 guns to his none. His shoulders sagged. This is theft, corruption. I'll have your badge. Dunbar. You're welcome to try. Meanwhile, get out of my jail before I decide to investigate those interesting financial records Jim's been telling me about. Seems several widows in the county have similar stories about loans their husbands never took. Mason backed away, hands raised. At the door, he turned, venom in his eyes. This isn't over. You can't protect her forever. Reed. Don't have to, Ethan said mildly. Just long enough for you to do something stupid, which, knowing you, won't be long. After Mason fled, Clara finally lowered the gun. Her hands shook now, delayed reaction setting in. Ethan was beside her instantly, steadying her. How did you know? Sam Henderson's boy saw Ferguson heading this way, ran to tell us. We were already coming when we heard Mason had joined the party. He gently took the revolver from her hands. You did good. I would have shot him. She was surprised to find it was true. If he'd touched me, I would have. I know. There was pride in his voice. Come on, let's get you home. Sheriff Dunbar cleared his throat. About those charges? What charges? Jim Harrison asked innocently. I didn't see any legal warrant. Did you see a legal warrant, Sheriff? Can't say I did. Must have been a misunderstanding. Dunbar met Clara's eyes. You're free to go, ma'am, and Mason won't bother you again. I'll see to it. The ride home was quiet. Ethan had brought the wagon, thoughtful as always. Clara sat beside him, wrapped in a blanket he'd brought, watching stars wheel overhead. The familiar countryside had never looked so beautiful. Is Samuel asleep? Mrs. Harrison came to sit with him. Told him you were helping someone in town. Be back late. Thank you. Nothing to thank me for. They rode in silence until Clara found her voice again. I meant it. About shooting him. That's not. I've never felt that way before. So cold. So certain. That's what it means to protect what's yours. Sometimes violence is the only language men like Mason understand. He glanced at her. Doesn't make you a bad person, makes you a survivor. Tom used to say I was too soft, too trusting. Tom was a fool. The words were blunt, but not unkind. Soft isn't weak. You can be gentle and still have steel in your spine. You proved that tonight. The ranch appeared before them, windows glowing warm with lamplight. Mrs. Harrison met them at the door, finger to her lips. Sleeping like an angel? Wore himself out asking when his mama would be home? She patted Clara's arm. You look done in, dear. Get some rest. After the Harrisons left, Clara checked on Samuel, smoothing his hair, breathing in his little boy's scent. Safe. They were safe. She found Ethan on the porch, keeping watch as always. You should rest too, she said. In a bit. He was carving again, hands steady in the lamplight. Wanted to say something first. Clara waited, sensing the weight of unspoken words. What you said to Mason, about being a mother, protecting your boy, that's true, but it's not the whole truth anymore. Her heart stuttered. What do you mean? He set down the carving, meeting her eyes. You're not just surviving anymore. Clara, you're living, building something, and maybe you're not building it alone. The words hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Clara thought of all the small moments, his hands steadying hers, the patient lessons, the quiet evenings by the fire, the way he'd crashed into that jail, ready to fight the world for her. Ethan, don't have to say anything, just wanted you to know. You and Samuel, you have a place here as long as you want it. Not as housekeeper and her boy, as family. If you'll have us. Us? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Me and the horses. Package deal. Clara laughed, surprising herself. After the terror of the night, laughter seemed impossible. But here it was, bubbling up from some deep well of joy she'd thought dried up. I think we can handle that. Ethan nodded, picking up his carving again. Clara recognized it now. A horse, small enough for a boy's hand. For Samuel. She stayed on the porch with him, watching stars and listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Mason might return, or send others. Winter was coming with its own threats. The future stretched uncertain as always, but tonight she'd stood her ground. Tonight, she'd protected what was hers. And tonight, a good man had offered her more than shelter. He'd offered belonging. Clara Mitchell had spent months running, weeks learning to fight. Now, perhaps, it was time to learn something harder, how to stay, how to trust, how to build a life on something stronger than fear. The autumn wind whispered across the prairie, and somewhere in the darkness, a nightbird called. But here in the circle of lamplight, with Ethan solid and sure beside her, Clara felt the first stirrings of something she'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. October painted the prairie in shades of gold and rust. 3 weeks had passed since the night in the jail, and an uneasy peace had settled over the ranch. Mason kept his distance. Though rumors drifted from town, he was drinking heavily, making threats, but taking no action. Sheriff Dunbar had made good on his promise, investigating Mason's dealings, keeping him occupied with legal troubles. Clara had almost allowed herself to believe they were safe. The morning it all came to a head dawned crisp and clear. She was in the garden, gathering the last of the vegetables before frost claimed them, when Samuel came running from the barn. "Mama, riders coming, lots of them!" Her blood chilled. She grabbed Samuel's hand, hurrying toward the house where the rifle waited. But Ethan emerged from the barn, calm as always, though she saw his hand rest on his gun. "Take Samuel inside," he said quietly. "Lock the door. Ethan, it's all right. I recognize Jim Harrison's horse, but stay inside until we know what's happening." Clara did as asked, though she kept watch through the window. 6 riders approached, Jim Harrison, Sheriff Dunbar, and 4 men she didn't recognize. Their faces were grim. Sheriff Dunbar dismounted first. "Reed, we need to talk." "Talk then. Mason's dead." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Through the window, she saw Ethan's stance shift, ready for trouble. "When?" "Found him this morning. Shot twice. His place was ransacked. What little he had left stolen." The sheriff's eyes were steady on Ethan. "Where were you last night?" "Here, all night. Clara and the boy can vouch for that." "Course they can." "And I'm sure you'll vouch for Mrs. Mitchell, too." "Sheriff," Jim Harrison interrupted, "you can't seriously think. I think Mason had plenty of enemies, but he was fixated on these 2. Dunbar sighed. "I've got Judge Carter breathing down my neck, demanding justice. Man's corrupt as they come, but he's still a judge." One of the unknown men spoke up. "We're here lawful-like. Reed, no one wants trouble, but we need to ask questions." Ethan nodded slowly. "Ask." The door opened behind Clara. She turned to find Samuel trying to slip out. "No, sweet boy, stay inside." "But Mama, those men look angry. They're just talking. Come help me with the bread." But she couldn't concentrate on baking, straining to hear the conversation outside. Voices rose and fell, too muffled to make out words. Finally, she could stand it no longer. "Stay here," she told Samuel firmly, then stepped onto the porch. The men turned to look at her. Sheriff Dunbar tipped his hat. "Mrs. Mitchell." "I was just asking your employer about last night." "We were all here," Clara said steadily. "Ethan read to Samuel after supper. We retired early. No one left the ranch." "You're certain?" "I'm a light sleeper. Sheriff, have been since—" She didn't need to finish, since she'd learned to fear night visitors. "I would have heard." One of the strangers stepped forward. He was older, with silver in his hair and keen eyes. "I'm Marshal Garrett, ma'am, federal marshal. This killing's got folks stirred up. Mason owed money all over 3 territories. Any one of those men might have done it." "Then why are you here?" Clara asked. "Because Mason sent a letter to Judge Carter yesterday. Claims you and Reed here conspired to ruin him. Says if anything happens to him, you're to blame." "That's ridiculous," Clara said. "We wanted nothing from Mason except to be left alone." "Maybe so, but the judge wants a thorough investigation." The marshal studied them both. "I'll need to search the property." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You have a warrant?" "Don't need one if you give permission." "Unless you have something to hide?" It was a trap. Clara knew. "Refuse and look guilty? Agree, and who knew what they might find?" She thought of Sarah's revolver, hidden in her room, the same caliber that killed Mason. She didn't know. "Search away," Ethan said calmly. "We've nothing to hide." The men spread out, examining the barn, the house, even the well. Clara stood with Ethan, Samuel between them, watching strangers paw through their life. When one headed for her room, her heart hammered. But the search turned up nothing. No stolen money, no evidence of violence, just a working ranch with worn furniture and mended clothes. Marshal Garrett returned, looking dissatisfied. Place is clean. Because we're innocent. Ethan said, maybe. Or maybe you're clever. The marshal mounted his horse. Don't leave the county. Either of you. This isn't over. After they left, Clara sank onto the porch steps, shaking. Ethan sat beside her, solid and warm. They'll be back, she said. Let them come. We've done nothing wrong. That didn't matter before. Won't matter now if they decide we're guilty. Clara. He waited until she looked at him. I won't let them take you. Or Samuel. No matter what. You can't fight the law forever. Watch me. That night, after Samuel was asleep, they sat by the fire talking in low voices, planning. If the worst happened, if they had to run, where would they go? What would they take? I have some money saved. Ethan said, not much, but enough to get us somewhere far. California, maybe. Oregon. Us? He looked at her steadily. You think I'd let you face this alone? After everything? This isn't your fight. Mason was my problem. No. His voice was firm. Not anymore. Hasn't been since the day you walked through my gate. Clara's eyes burned. I've brought you nothing but trouble. You've brought me life, he said simply. This place was a tomb before you came. Just me and the ghosts and the silence. You and Samuel, you made it a home again. Ethan, he reached out, carefully, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand covered hers, work rough and gentle. I meant what I said before, about family, about building something together. His thumb traced over her knuckles. Maybe now's not the time, with trouble at our door. But Clara, I need you to know, what I feel, it's not gratitude or pity or convenience. It's... I know. She turned her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. I feel it too. They sat in silence, hands linked, watching the fire die to embers. Outside, wind rattled the windows, winter announcing its approach. Time was running short in more ways than one. A sound made them both freeze, horses, moving fast. Ethan was on his feet instantly, gun in hand. Clara grabbed the rifle, heart pounding. But the rider who appeared in their doorway wasn't the marshal or Judge Carter's men. It was Jim Harrison, breathless and urgent. They found the killer, he gasped. Man named Whelan. Caught him trying to sell Mason's watch in Dodge City. He confessed, owed Mason gambling debts. Figured killing him was easier than paying. Clara sagged with relief. Then it's over? Should be. Marshal's riding to arrest him now. Jim grinned. Told you folks not to worry. Truth has a way of coming out. After Jim left, Clara and Ethan stood in the doorway, looking out at the star-filled sky. The weight that had pressed on them for weeks was lifting, leaving something lighter in its wake. So what now? Clara asked softly. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket, pulling out something small. In the lamplight, Clara saw it was a ring, simple silver, worn smooth with age. This was my mother's, he said. Been carrying it around for days, trying to find the right words. But maybe there aren't any fancy words for this. He met her eyes. Clara Mitchell, you came here desperate and afraid, ready to trade your freedom for your boy's life. But you never needed chains. You deserved care, respect, a place to belong. I'm asking if you'll let me give you that, permanent-like, as my wife. Clara's vision blurred. Are you sure? I come with a past, with Samuel, I'm sure. Question is, are you? She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the hunger, the fear, the desperate offer to become a servant. How Ethan had refused that offer, insisting on her dignity, teaching her strength she didn't know she had, how he'd stood between her and harm, patient and steady as the mountains. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'm sure. He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly. Then, with Samuel sleeping peacefully inside and the vast prairie stretching endlessly around them, Ethan Reed kissed his bride-to-be under the Texas stars. 2 weeks later, they stood before Reverend Mills in the small church, Samuel between them holding the rings. The pews were sparse, the Harrisons, Sheriff Dunbar, a few others who'd chosen kindness over gossip. Clara wore a simple blue dress Mrs. Harrison had helped her make. Ethan had trimmed his beard and donned his best shirt. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Samuel cheered, making everyone laugh. And when they walked out into the crisp November morning, Clara saw their wagon decorated with ribbons and wildflowers, the community's way of welcoming her properly at last. That night, as snow began to fall, they sat together as a family for the first time. Samuel showed Ethan the drawings he'd made of the horses. Clara worked on mending while Ethan carved. The small house was warm and full of quiet contentment. Mrs. Reed, Ethan said softly, testing the words. Clara smiled. Mr. Reed, are you happy? She looked around the simple room, at her son, safe and loved, at her husband, gentle and true, at the life they were building together against all odds. More than I ever thought possible. And outside, the first winter storm of the season wrapped the ranch in white, blanketing the past in pristine snow. While inside, 3 hearts beat as one, no longer alone in the vast wilderness, but home. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long drive? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and feedback mean the world to us.